On September 24th, 1835, a man named Arthur Sterling made a mistake. He didn't fire a weapon, he didn't break a law, he didn't steal a single coin. He simply paid a 10-year-old boy a compliment. Sterling was a surveyor from Ohio, a man of maps, logic, and precise measurements. He believed that the world was a rational place. But he was standing on the edge of the Mississippi Delta, in a place where logic had been replaced by a terrified, violent paranoia. He didn't know it yet, but that single, innocent compliment was about to trigger a chain reaction. By sunset, 3 people would be dead, a family history would be erased, and the law itself would cover up the crime. This isn't just a story about the brutality of the past. It is a story about the most dangerous weapon in history, the written word. Join me as we open the Surveyor's logbook and step back into the heat, the dust, and the silence of Cypress Landing. The incident occurred on a Thursday afternoon, in late September, when the heat sits on the Mississippi land like a physical weight. It was the kind of heat that doesn't just make you sweat, it presses against your lungs, making every breath feel heavy and thick. Arthur Sterling had stopped his wagon at the gates of Cypress Landing. It was a sprawling estate, 600 acres of cotton that foamed white against the dark, muddy earth. To a casual observer, it looked prosperous. The air smelled of wet soil, the sharp tang of horse sweat, and the cloying, oversweet scent of decaying vegetation drifting off the Yazoo River. Sterling was a man of science. He was precise. He was from Ohio, a free state, and he carried with him a certain northern naivety. He believed that if you applied the correct instruments to the world, you could understand it. He had spent 3 weeks in the Delta, mapping property lines, fighting off clouds of mosquitoes, and he was tired. He wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't an agitator. He just needed fresh water for his mules and a place to rest his eyes before pushing on to Vicksburg. He didn't intend to stay long. He certainly didn't intend to witness the destruction of 3 lives before the sun went down. As he waited for the plantation owner to acknowledge his arrival, Sterling walked his team of mules toward a trough near the edge of the main yard. It was quiet. The house servants were busy with the midday meal, moving silently between the detached kitchen and the main residence. But near the carriage house, in the shade of a massive live oak tree, a tree that is central to this story, a boy was sitting in the dirt. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old. He wore a rough cotton shirt that hung loosely on his malnourished frame, and trousers that ended mid-shin. He was playing with a stick, or so Sterling thought at first. The surveyor watched idly, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, waiting for someone to attend to him. The boy was scratching lines in the dust, smoothing them over with his palm, and scratching them again. It was a repetitive motion. Scratch, smooth, like he was practicing a spell. Sterling, bored and curious, walked closer. He expected to see drawings of animals, or perhaps a map of the yard. Children often mimicked what they saw adults doing. But as he approached, his shadow fell across the boy's work. The child froze. The stick hovered inches above the ground. The boy didn't look up, he just stopped breathing. Sterling looked down at the dirt. And what he saw there made no sense to his organized, logical mind. There, etched in the Mississippi dust with perfect, practiced precision, were words. Not random letters, not crude approximations or scribbles, but a sentence written in a script that matched the handwriting of an educated clerk. In the beginning was the word. Sterling stared. The boy finally looked up, his eyes wide with a terror that Sterling, in his northern ignorance, did not immediately understand. "You wrote that?" Sterling asked. His voice was low, gentle. The boy scrambled backward, erasing the words frantically with his hands. kicking dust over the letters until they were nothing but a gray smudge in the dirt. "I didn't do nothing, sir," the boy whispered. "Just playing, just making marks." "That wasn't just marks," Sterling said, more fascinated than accusatory. "That was the Gospel of John, who taught you to write like that." He asked the question with the casual curiosity of a man who came from a place where literacy was a virtue. In Ohio, if a child could write, it was a sign of promise. It was something to be celebrated. Sterling didn't realize that he wasn't in Ohio anymore. He didn't know that in Mississippi in 1835, he was standing in the shadow of the Nat Turner Rebellion. Just 4 years prior, Nat Turner, a literate slave in Virginia, had read the Bible. He had read about prophets and warriors, and he had led an uprising. Since then, a slave who could write was considered more dangerous than a man with a gun. A gun could kill one man. A literate slave could forge passes. They could read abolitionist pamphlets. They could coordinate an army. Sterling was asking about a skill. But in this place, he was asking about a crime. Before the boy could answer, a shadow fell over both of them. "Mr. Sterling, I presume." Sterling turned. Standing on the porch steps was Percival Drayton, the master of Cypress Landing. He was a man in his 50s, with the hard, weathered face of someone who spent his life battling the river and the sun. He was dressed in a linen suit that had wilted in the heat, and he was holding a riding crop, tapping it rhythmically against his thigh. "Tab, tab, tab." "I am," Sterling said, stepping forward and extending his hand. "My apologies for the intrusion. I was admiring this boy's ability." It was a mistake. A catastrophic, irreversible mistake made in a moment of social awkwardness. Sterling thought he was offering a compliment, a piece of small talk to bridge the gap between strangers. Drayton's hand, which had been reaching for Sterling, stopped in midair. The tapping of the riding crop ceased instantly. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. "His ability?" Drayton asked softly. "He was writing in the dirt," Sterling said, oblivious to the temperature of the conversation dropping 20 degrees. "Scripture, actually. A remarkably clear hand for a child who—" Sterling stopped. He finally saw the look on Percival Drayton's face. It wasn't pride, it wasn't curiosity. It was the look of a man who had just discovered a viper in his bedsheets. Drayton looked past Sterling, directly at the boy. The child was trembling now, pressing himself against the rough bark of the oak tree as if trying to merge with it, to disappear into the wood. "Isaac," Drayton said, his voice was terrifyingly calm, "go to the smokehouse, wait for me there." The boy, Isaac, didn't argue, he didn't run. He simply detached himself from the tree and walked toward a small brick building on the edge of the property. His head was down, his shoulders were slumped. It was the posture of the condemned. "Mr. Drayton," Sterling began, sensing he had done something wrong but not grasping the magnitude. "I didn't mean to get the boy in trouble. I just thought it was unusual." "Unusual," Drayton repeated. He turned his cold blue eyes onto the surveyor. "Mr. Sterling, in this state, teaching a slave to write is a crime. But that boy learning to write, that is not a crime. That is an act of war." Now, before we continue, you have to understand the mind of Percival Drayton. To us, his reaction seems insane, overreaction, madness. But to him, it was survival. In the 1830s, the southern states passed what were known as the anti-literacy laws. These weren't just guidelines, they were strict statutes. In North Carolina, teaching a slave to read was punishable by fines and imprisonment. In Louisiana, it could get you a year in jail. In Mississippi, it was viewed as inciting insurrection. Why? Because the plantation system relied on isolation. It relied on the idea that the world ended at the fence line. Reading broke that fence. Reading meant communication. It meant the Bible could be interpreted as a call to freedom, not just a command to obey. Drayton invited Sterling onto the porch, not out of hospitality, but because he needed to contain the witness. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey with a steady hand, but his eyes never left the window overlooking the yard. "You're from Ohio," Drayton stated. It wasn't a question. "I am," Sterling replied, holding the glass without drinking. The amber liquid trembled slightly in his grip. "I understand our customs differ, Mr. Drayton, but surely a child scribbling in the dust—" "It's not the scribbling," Drayton interrupted sharply. "It's the communication. 4 years ago, they said Nat Turner was a good boy. They said he was religious. And then he butchered 60 white men, women, and children in their beds because he read a book that told him he was equal. Since then, we do not tolerate literacy. It is the spark that ignites the powder keg." Drayton drank his whiskey in one swallow. The glass hit the table with a thud. "If Isaac can write, someone taught him. If someone taught him, they are teaching others. And if they are teaching others, they are passing notes, they are forging travel papers, they are planning." He stood up. "I need to find the teacher." Sterling watched helplessly as the plantation machinery shifted from agricultural production to internal inquisition. Drayton rang a bell, summoning his overseer, a man named Cobb who looked like he had been carved out of granite and resentment. "Isaac is in the smokehouse," Drayton told Cobb. "He can write," he was quoting John. Cobb's reaction was immediate. He spat on the ground and checked the pistol at his belt. "Who taught him?" "That's what we're going to find out. Bring me his mother, and bring me the blacksmith, Jonah. If there's a network, Jonah will know about it." Sterling sat on the porch, paralyzed by his own complicity. He wanted to leave. He wanted to get back in his wagon and drive until Mississippi was a bad memory. But he couldn't move. He felt anchored by guilt, compelled to witness the consequences of his casual observation. The interrogation took place in the yard, in full view of the main house. It was not a court proceeding. There was no judge, no jury, no defense. There was only Drayton, Cobb, and the terrified population of Cypress Landing gathered to watch. They dragged Isaac out of the smokehouse. The boy was crying now, silent, heaving sobs that shook his small body. They brought his mother, a woman named Esther, who worked in the laundry. She was screaming, begging, trying to reach her son, held back by 2 field hands who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else on earth. And they brought Jonah, the blacksmith. A massive man, 60 years old, with gray hair and hands scarred by decades of fire and iron. He stood stoically, watching Drayton with an expression that Sterling interpreted as resignation. "Isaac," Drayton said, standing over the kneeling boy, "Mr. Sterling here tells me you know the gospel. Is that true?" Isaac couldn't speak. He nodded, a tiny, jerky motion. "Write it," Drayton commanded. He pointed to the dirt. "Write my name." Isaac's hand trembled. He reached out a finger and slowly, painstakingly, wrote D-R-A-Y-T-O-N in the dust. A gasp went through the assembled slaves. To them, this wasn't just a skill, it was magic, and it was a death sentence. "Who taught you?" Drayton asked. His voice was almost gentle, which made it worse. Isaac looked at his mother. He looked at Jonah. He looked at the ground. "If you don't tell me," Drayton said, "I will whip your mother until the skin is gone from her back, and then I will whip you." "I did." The voice came from the blacksmith. Jonah stepped forward, shedding the hands of the men holding him. "I taught him," Jonah said. His voice was deep, booming across the yard. "I learned from your father, 30 years ago, before the laws changed. I taught the boy. He has a quick mind. It was a sin to let it rot." Drayton stared at Jonah. "And who else? Who else have you taught?" "Just him," Jonah said. "Just the boy." "You're lying," Drayton said. "You're a smart man, Jonah. You wouldn't risk your life for one child unless he was a messenger, unless he was carrying words for you." Drayton turned to Cobb. "Search the smithy, tear it apart, look for papers, look for charcoal, look for anything." This is the moment where Sterling hoped for salvation. He hoped Cobb would find nothing. He hoped it would end with a whipping and a warning. Cobb left. The silence in the yard stretched for 10 agonizing minutes. The only sound was the wind in the oak tree and Esther's weeping. When Cobb returned, he was carrying a small wooden box found buried under the floor of the blacksmith shop. Sterling held his breath. Inside were scraps of paper, stolen from the main house waste bins, smoothed out and covered in charcoal writing. Drayton snatched them. He expected to find maps. He expected to find letters to abolitionists in the North. He expected to find plans to burn the house down. But they weren't rebellion plans. They weren't maps. They were names. Jonah had been writing down birth dates. A list of people sold away from the plantation over the last 20 years. A record of families separated. A history of the people of Cypress Landing. Written down so it wouldn't be forgotten. Sarah, sold 1829. Thomas, died of fever 1831. It was a genealogy of the oppressed. Drayton looked at the papers. He couldn't read the intent behind them. He only saw the capability. He saw a record-keeping system operating right under his nose. "This is an organization," Drayton announced to the yard. "This is a cell." He looked at Esther, the mother. "Did you know?" Esther wept, clutching her apron. "I knew he was learning the Bible, Master, just the Bible, that's all it was, salvation." "There is no salvation in disobedience," Drayton said. He turned to Sterling, who was standing at the rail of the porch, gripping the wood until his knuckles were white. "Mr. Sterling," Drayton called out, "you are a man of the law, a surveyor. You record boundaries. Bear witness to this. This is how we maintain the boundary between civilization and chaos." Drayton turned back to Cobb. "Hang them." "All of them?" Cobb asked. "The teacher, the student, and the mother who hid it. If we leave any root, the weed grows back." Sterling finally found his voice. He stumbled down the steps, his dignity forgotten. "Mr. Drayton, stop, this is madness. The boy is 10 years old. The man was writing family histories, not battle plans. You cannot kill them for writing names." Drayton turned on him, his face cold and hard as a tombstone. "I can do whatever I please with my property, Mr. Sterling. And if you interfere, I will have the sheriff arrest you for inciting insurrection. That carries a penalty of 10 years in the state penitentiary. Do you wish to join them?" Sterling stopped. He looked at the guns on the hips of the overseers. He looked at the isolation of the plantation, miles from the nearest town. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that he had no power here. The law was not a shield. It was a weapon in Drayton's hand. They didn't build a gallows. They used the live oak tree, the same tree where Isaac had been sitting when Sterling arrived. They threw 3 ropes over a sturdy branch. The sun was getting low now, casting long shadows across the dust. They took Jonah first. The old blacksmith didn't fight. He looked at Drayton and said, "You can kill the writer, but you can't kill the words. They're in the dirt now." Then they took Esther. She fought, she screamed for mercy, for her son, for God. Her screams were cut short when the rope tightened. Finally, they took Isaac. He was so small, the rope was too thick for his neck. Sterling watched, unable to look away, feeling that he owed the boy at least that terrible respect. He watched the small legs kick, and then, still. He watched the charcoal-stained hands go limp. When it was over, the sun was setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the white cotton fields. The 3 bodies turned slowly in the evening breeze. Creaking, turning. Drayton walked over to Sterling, who was retching into the bushes near the porch. "You should leave now, Mr. Sterling," Drayton said. "I believe your business here is concluded." Sterling left. He drove his mules hard, risking injury in the twilight, desperate to put distance between himself and Cypress Landing. He didn't stop until he reached Vicksburg the next day. But the story doesn't end with Sterling's flight. And this is why we know what happened. Arthur Sterling was a man who recorded things. That was his profession. And he decided, in his grief and guilt, that he would not let Drayton's version of events be the only one. He couldn't prosecute Drayton. The laws of Mississippi protected the master's right to kill his slaves for insurrectionary behavior. But Sterling could document it. He wrote a detailed account of the event in his Surveyor's Logbook. He recorded the date, September 24th, 1835. He recorded the names, Isaac, Esther, Jonah. He recorded the location, Cypress Landing, Yazoo County. He wrote down exactly what Isaac had been writing. In the beginning was the word. And then he went to the county courthouse to look up the official record of the event. He wanted to see how Drayton had justified the destruction of 3 lives. He found the entry in the county tax records for 1835. It was a single line item filed by Percival Drayton to adjust his property tax liability. Deduction 3 field hands. Cause of loss, defective property, destroyed to prevent contamination. There were no names, no mention of reading, no mention of the Bible or family histories. Just defective property. Sterling kept his journal. He returned to Ohio and became a quiet abolitionist, haunted by the ghost of the boy he had accidentally killed with a compliment. The journal sat in a family attic for 100 years, a private testimony to a public crime. Cypress Landing is gone now. The house burned down in 1863 during the Vicksburg campaign. The fields are overgrown or paved over. But the live oak tree, that massive ancient witness, still stands. And local folklore in Yazoo County says that nothing grows in the dirt beneath that tree. They say the ground is barren, as if the earth itself refuses to cover up what happened there. The tragedy of Isaac is not just that he died. It's that he died for the very thing we tell children is the key to their future: education. He died because he possessed a mind that refused to be contained by his chains. He was executed not for a crime, but for a capability. And the man who triggered it, Arthur Sterling, lived the rest of his life knowing that his simple, innocent words were the death warrant for a 10-year-old boy. It forces us to ask a difficult question. In a system built on lies, is the truth the most dangerous weapon of all? What do you think? Was Jonah right when he said, "You can't kill the words"? Or did Drayton succeed in killing the history along with the people? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to support us in digging up the history that was meant to be buried, please subscribe. This story is a reminder that literacy has not always been a right. For millions, it was a forbidden fruit purchased with blood. Until next time.